What's up, guys? We're back for the revival of the Triple Play podcast. You want to talk about new year, new us? It's 2026. I don't even remember the last time we had a podcast. It had to be senior year of high school. Did we do an episode in college?
Yeah, I think it was 2019 with our last episode. It's been a while, but good to be back. It's been too long. Obviously, with both of us going all the way through college and not picking us up, a lot has happened in the world
Yeah.
of Detroit sports. I kind of look back and remember the dog days of doing this
Yeah.
podcast. The Lions were terrible. The Tigers were the worst team in baseball. Red Wings, Pistons, they
Yeah.
were unwatchable.
We had
But
the
now we're back.
clown, we had the circus clown music for I don't even, was it the Lions? Was it the Tigers? I can't even remember. It was like every team in Detroit.
Yeah, those were some tough days back then, but we're back now. It's looking like all of our teams are going
Yeah.
to make the playoffs except the Lions, which who would have thought at the beginning of this year if you would have told me they'd be the team to miss the playoffs. I wouldn't have predicted it, but here we
Well,
are.
honestly, though, like if you had to pick one, obviously we'll see what happens with the Red Wings. I think the Red Wings are still. I mean, you got the Olympic break coming up, and that's a month-long thing. And with Four Nations last year, we saw how that kind of killed the vibes for Detroit. And anything can happen still. It's a long season, still in the NBA too. If like Kate Cunningham went down, who knows? But um, honestly, like for the Lions. Not too surprising going into the season, I would say, with a tougher schedule that they were going to show some, I guess, regression, wins and losses wise. This much, a lot of people were putting like a floor of maybe 10, 11 wins, something like that. Well, they ended up 9-8 and they missed the playoffs as well. But that's why I got the little Cancun background going on because the Lions are now in Cancun. They had their I guess closing pressers or whatever you want to call them, sign off pressers. Brad Holmes is on Thursday, but for most of the team, it was today as well, where they clean out their lockers and that sort of thing. But Dan Campbell, he said he gave himself a freaking F. That was an exact terminology. Obviously, windows are small in the NFL. It seems like right now the window I want to say is still open for Detroit. Obviously, they finished last in the NFC North, not a great sign, but you have a much easier schedule with some teams that obviously did struggle. You would expect some of them to get a little bit better, but the teams like Tennessee, I don't think they're going anywhere. You get to play them next year as well. So it's going to be interesting, but I guess the big thing to focus on first, John Morton is out as offensive coordinator. I'd say that's very not surprising. I think it would have been more surprising if they kept him, especially him being relieved of play calling duties before the Washington Commanders game where Dan Campbell took over. It seemed to work at first, and then being a head coach and also balancing calling plays. I mean, Nick, you would know a little bit better than me. It's pretty difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it's difficult to manage both, especially when you go into a season not expecting to be the offensive coordinator, which Dan Campbell had to assume with the non-success of John Morton. But it is something that can be done. Just thinking off the top of my head, most of the head coaches that are currently in the playoffs are offensive coordinators, or
Mhm.
defensive coordinators. So it's not something that I have a problem with if Dan's calling the plays, but I think the Lions are in a situation where they need somebody who's established. Honestly, maybe a safe bet. You think of guys like Cliff Kingsbury. That role just opened up. Todd Monken with John Harbaugh leaving. You can kind of wait and see with a guy like maybe Mike McDaniel if he ends up getting let go by the Dolphins. I don't think that's going to end up being the case, but the Lions have such a great offense that they can probably convince the majority of top level offensive coordinators to come and be in Detroit because you could look at that as a step up. You know, if you're a guy, let's say Cliff Kingsbury, for example, he's leaving the Cardinals to look for a better job. You come to the Lions, you have all of those weapons on offense, and then maybe that's your stepping stone to get back into a head coaching position. So it's a very promising place to be, even with some of the mishappenings this year.
So it's now going to be 3 years, three offensive coordinators for the Lions. I guess you spoke on different possibilities, but how important is it for the Lions to really get this hire right heading into next season?
Yeah, I think it's really important on the offensive side of the ball because I love Dan Campbell. He's a great guy, but I think his best skills are not calling plays. We saw him do an okay job at it this year, but having somebody that is a steady pick as the offensive coordinator, we don't need a guy. Some of the reports surfaced today of someone like David Blau being a first-time play caller in the NFL. We don't need an aspiring coach that's going to be the next big thing. We don't need to take that gamble, even though Dan Campbell, he's Mr. Gamble. We don't need somebody that's the next big thing. I think we need a safe hire. We need somebody who's consistent. We need somebody with experience who's going to come in and run this offense.
No, I would 100% agree. I think you can't mess around with this hire. I mean, I just talked about it, but windows are so small in the NFL. Who knows where you are past next season? Like, I feel like you still have a lot of key pieces around this team, and obviously with the draft coming up and free agency as well, you need to obviously get better in those roles. But I think Dan Campbell is much better suited when he's just the head coach and the leader of the team and program with the Detroit Lions. And I think he's shown that in the past. I think it's a lot to balance for Dan. And everyone handles things differently. I think obviously when you look at just the pure stats, obviously the Lions were one of the best offenses still in the NFL, but they also thrived against really bad teams. When they played teams that were going to the playoffs, I guess outside of the Chicago Bears, they for the most part struggled. I mean, that's just what it was. They went to Philly,
Mhm.
they struggled. Even Kansas City, they struggled when they went there. So I think it's so important that they nail the sire because who knows what could happen in the future. It feels like it's now or never for Detroit, and especially if you miss the playoffs next year, I just don't know where this thing's going.
Yeah, and especially on the defensive side of the ball too. I think Dan Campbell mentioned that they're going to consider all options, and I don't think that means Kelvin Shepard's safe in his role at all. And the benefits of potentially bringing in somebody that's more experienced on defense as well is I don't know how involved Dan Campbell currently is with the defense. You have a first year coordinator. Dan Campbell's probably spending a lot of his time on that side of the building, even though he's an offensive minded guy and he's probably not contributing much on defense. That's somebody that in their first year, you're going to have to go and put some sort of effort or some sort of time into making sure that he's doing his job and has all the tools that he needs to be successful as the guy who's ultimately in charge. And you think of, certain coaches and drawing back on my time at Michigan. I got to work under Jesse Minter, who is obviously having a lot of success in the NFL nowadays. And Jim Harbaugh just had the confidence in him where he gave him the defense, and Jim Harbaugh was not involved in the defense. He gave it all to Jesse. Jesse ran the defense. He was experienced. He did a great job, and now he's succeeding at the NFL level. So I think that's something to also consider is, maybe bringing in somebody with more experience on defense to kind of alleviate some of the pressure that's been on Dan Campbell with having to call plays this year, and then also probably having to make sure that Kelvin Shepard's succeeding in his new role as the defensive coordinator. It's a lot on his plate, and you could kind of see it throughout the season.
I mean, what was your assessment of Shepard in year one? Like, if you had to give him a grade, what grade would you give him?
I think there's been a commitment or love on the Lions defense to play a lot of man coverage. And I think over the past 2 years, if you're down some of your corners, if you're down your secondary with Branch, Kirby, Terrion was hurt, DJ Reed missed a lot of time, all those guys, there's got to be some willingness to get away from the man stuff. And that's somewhere where they really struggled is they're committed to the man coverage, and that's fine. But when you don't have a good defensive line that can really attack and get after the quarterback, you're very susceptible to big plays in man coverage, and that's something that the Lions, in my opinion, need to invest in. It's something that they came into this season in the offseason. Everybody was talking about the defense and defensive line and getting another edge rusher to pair with Hutchinson. And that's something that you heard Brad and Dan double down on is that they're fine. They got Davenport, we're good. And then you just see throughout the season, there's no real pass rush. Looking at the statistics on paper, if you're a big PFF guy, you look at Aiden Hutchinson, led the league in pressures, but a lot of his sacks aren't necessarily one-on-one wins. and
Mhm.
he's very much so double teamed. He's chipped by the tight end. He's chipped by the running back, whatever you call it. That's a lot of pressure on him. It's going to be hard for him to deliver, but those quarterbacks just have so much time, it seems like, and it's gotten to the lines, especially when you're playing a lot of man coverage. So I think Shepard needs to take a look in the mirror and he needs to evaluate, are we going to play man same percentages we did the past 2 years with Aaron Glenn? Another Aaron Glenn comment. He had zero interceptions on his defense, this entire year. I don't even know how that's a real stat. So you got to look at it all. I think they could do a little bit better job disguising. Something we did at Michigan is we would mug a bunch of people up on the defensive line, whether that's linebackers, safeties, and you saw that with the Vikings in Week 17. They would line up six guys on the defensive line, and they dropped two or three into coverage, and our offensive line was out of sorts the entire time. That's something you get out of a more experienced coordinator such as Brian Flores, but I didn't see a whole lot of disguising, mugging people up on the defensive line, dropping into coverage. A lot of those things kind of fell short, in my opinion, watching this Lions defense this year.
Another thing, you told me this a few weeks ago. I thought this was interesting. Obviously, we were talking about like Shepard did do well sometimes, and when they had the Legion of Whom and everything like that, like the Monday night game when they played Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay was really hot coming into that game, and they basically shut them down for the entirety of the game outside of the first drive in the second half. But injuries have been such a big thing for this Detroit Lions team the last few years. I feel like 1 year can be a fluke, but 2 years in a row, is that something that you go back and kind of reassess how you're doing training camp in your off-season program as well?
Mhm. Yeah, that's something that, at Michigan we had to adjust because we had the 3 straight years where we're in college football playoffs. I joined the team in 2022, so that was year two of the playoffs. From talking to people who were there in 2021, it seems like Michigan really overdid it with their practice schedule, all of their planning, everything. That takes a toll on guys. And you go into some of these big games, your legs aren't fresh. Um, and you can see that on the field when they're not playing with intensity, not flying around the field. So that definitely does take into, account what certain practice schedules can look like in terms of injuries, tiredness. And then as we grew from 2022, practice schedule got a little lighter. We had 10 practices or whatever, and instead of 15 the previous year. And then we get ousted by TCU in the playoffs. And then you go into year three, the year we won the national championship, and the schedule was even more different.
Mhm.
So there are certain things that you can do from a head coaching perspective of trying to keep guys more fresh. I like to think with the Lions in the case of I can't remember if it was year one or year two of Dan Campbell when they did Hard Knocks. There's
Mhm.
the clip of them at practice and they're tackling, and Dan's like,
Yeah,
I wouldn't do this, if I wouldn't put you guys in harm's way if I didn't think this was going to make you better. And
right.
maybe they're doing that a little too much and it's wearing guys out. They're tired, and they're more injury prone. I think that that's something that needs to look at because, as you mentioned, having the most injuries or top three injuries in the NFL 2 years in a row, you do have
Mhm.
to look at that stuff and how you're handling from a coaching perspective. Maybe you even need to look at the strength and conditioning staff and see if there's any changes you need to make there.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I think also injuries you can only blame so much for a team and their success. And obviously, Detroit was able to find ways last season. Obviously, ended short in what they thought was going to be. I felt like a deep run in the playoffs, and obviously they had the first round bye. But then Washington comes into the Ford Field, and from that point on, did it feel like, I guess, to you that this team, in ways, felt like they deserved just to be number one and they didn't work for it? Like leadership wise, like obviously we're not around that program and we don't know things like that. But did it feel like it was almost like an arrogance around this year's team of like, hey, we just deserve to already be in the playoffs. Like we don't have to work as hard and like players also like they were speaking today, and Amon-Ra St. Brown was asked, would he have been surprised if you told him how the season would go in July and everything? And he was like, "Yeah, man, it would have shocked me." Like, is it the attitude of this of the Lions that needs to change as well, or is this just the coaching and a few players missing as well?
Yeah, I'll start with saying that at least my expectation for the Lions coming to the year, I didn't think they were going to win the division. Their schedule was very difficult. I thought they would be a wild card team. I thought they would make the playoffs. I did not see 9-8. I thought they would be one or two wins better and sneak into the playoffs. But I do think there was a large bit, I like to say entitlement with this group.
Yeah,
I think they
yeah.
were entitled, arrogant, similar word. Um, and my biggest example of this, it was the Christmas Day game, which again, reminding everybody, if they would have beat
Mhm.
the Steelers, they would have beat the Vikings, they would have won the NFC North, and we'd
But
be going into, or I was just
even
gonna say,
if
we'd be going into this weekend hosting a playoff game at Ford Field. And
yeah,
I'll give you an example, and then let you go ahead of their entitlement, their arrogance. It was the Christmas Day game against the Vikings. They come out, you see on social media, Panay Sewell. I don't want to be playing on Christmas. I want to be spending time with my family. Amon Ra.
mhm,
Why do they always schedule us on Christmas? I don't want to play
mhm.
on Christmas. Anzalone. I don't want to play on Christmas. Okay, I get that playing on Christmas is not the ideal, schedule
Yeah.
if you're an NFL player when you have to play on Thanksgiving. I know that that sucks. At the same time, you're making multi-millions of dollars playing on
Mhm.
Christmas. I'm not going to feel bad for you as a fan that you have to go to work on Christmas. You know who else has to go to work on Christmas? A lot of people in this country.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
I'm not going to be
they
feel bad for you.
well, they broke the streaming record. I mean, they had the eyes of the nation and world on them because it was on Netflix, and they just completely laid an egg. I mean, uh, you talked about how like they had to beat the Steelers. Even if they had beat the Vikings, they would put themselves in a situation where that Chicago game, if they had won, and I guess the way things did end up going, they would have been in the playoffs. But they couldn't win at. They just couldn't win at Minnesota. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting to see what moving forward what happens. But I want to switch gears over to Kyle Whittingham, and the University of Michigan. Obviously, a lot of things happened. We won't touch too much on Sharon Moore, but obviously he was fired for cause. Obviously was arrested and everything like that. And then for Kyle Whittingham, he goes on his own whirlwind of adventure as well, where he announced he's stepping down from Utah, and I forget, it was like 14-ish days later or something like that. He was now becoming the 22nd head coach at Michigan football. I guess what's your reaction to that? And as a quote unquote Michigan man, how do you feel about the hire?
Yeah, as a Michigan man, I love the hire, and I'll give you a few reasons why I really like it. I think that with everything that happened with the Sharon Moore situation, everything that's happened and unraveled the past 3 years, it was very important for Michigan to make this hire ahead of the transfer portal window. You saw Penn State, they ended up with Matt Campbell, but they fired Franklin maybe a little bit too early. They went through all of the processes of all of the recruits leaving, all of the big names that they thought they were, you know, in line to go and get. They kind of oversold themselves as a program that people are going to want to come and
Mhm.
be at, and that didn't end up being the case with a lot of coaches kind of turning them down. And they saw everything pass them by. They lost their entire recruiting class, and they were in a really bad situation until they kind of pulled Matt Campbell out of nowhere, and I'll grade that as a good, not great hire, but they got a guy
I mean, they
that they
needed a
needed.
guy. I mean, they like
Yeah,
seriously, they were every single dude that they were rumored to be. I forget what the
yeah,
final number ended up being, but like every dude they were linked to at some point got a bunch of money because of the extension that they were tied to this
yeah,
Penn State job. So their current school didn't want to let him go. I think if Matt Rule and Nebraska had to redo it all again, I don't think Nebraska would have given him his extension, but it is what it is at this point. But
yeah.
Penn State, like
Uh,
you said, did end up with their guy. So
yeah. And on the case of Whittingham, we didn't know who was going to be making the hire for Michigan. We didn't I personally did not think it was going to be Ward Manuel, but he was the guy that ended up making the hire. He got it in before the transfer portal window. Again, the Sharon Moore firing happened after National Signing Day, which, I'll leave that opinion to the crowd on how they want to view that. But Michigan was able to keep a good amount of recruits throughout the hiring of Kyle Whittingham. You've seen a few guys request their, you know, national letter of intent to be released and to be able to go elsewhere. But you kept the number one running back in the country. You're bringing back your quarterback. You're bringing back your number one wide receiver. And I believe a few minutes before we started this podcast, it looks like you're bringing back Justice Haynes, and a lot of your O line who had entered the portal are now announcing that they're coming back. So getting Bryce to come back was the big domino to fall. And now I think you're going to see a lot of these Michigan players kind of band together and run it back under Kyle Whittingham.
Yeah, I mean, I I think the most interesting thing to me is he doesn't have Midwest ties. He spent basically his entire life in Utah and everything. He's been there for a long time. With that being said, I do really like the two coordinators he's bringing in. I think Jason Beck and Jay Hill are two really good hires that he's bringing with him. And I think that was, I guess, just reading stuff online, Utah fans felt like he was going out there with not bringing anyone. Well, he's taken a good chunk of the staff. They molded him and helped him succeed at Utah, and obviously a program at BYU. You look at Jay Hill, like you're constantly going up against that team every single year. Like if he's a respectable coordinator and you play him a lot and that dude sticks out to you, how can I bring him to my next school? I think he did a great job with that. With that being said, like I, I'm curious to know your opinion on Bryce Underwood. Year one, I think obviously you go in with sky high expectations. The number of $12 million, it's just constantly thrown around here and there, and whether it's fair or not, it is what it is. But I guess what are your expectations for year two for Bryce Underwood? Are we going to see a big jump for him?
I think that we will see a decent jump. I'm not going to say a large jump from Bryce Underwood in year two, but you kind of saw them cut him loose in their bowl game, and Michigan fans might have had a little bit of humble pie there. He had a great first half. You see the
Mhm,
flashes at points, and then the interceptions come, and the bad
mhm,
decisions start to get a little too big. So I think Bryce has all the tools. I would rather have Bryce Underwood than have him leave. I was never very concerned about
mhm,
Bryce leaving because I think at Michigan, they're kind of one of those five schools where they have all the money, they have all the resources. We can
mhm,
go and get a guy who's probably going to be better than Bryce Underwood in year two in the transfer portal. But I have no issues with Michigan taking the homegrown guy, investing in a young talent, and then hoping you see the payoffs in years two and three, and then hopefully year four if he stays around. Maybe we don't even want him to stay around because if he has a good year
mhm.
three and all goes well, he's going to the NFL draft. So I have no problem taking the route of playing the long game with Bryce Underwood. Did he probably under deliver this year on expectations? Yes, but the last true freshman quarterback to really succeed in college football was Trevor Lawrence. So I
Yeah.
can't say that I was surprised with how this season goes. And if Sharon was still the head coach, this would have been the judgment year. And I know we're going to get into a little bit of Kyle Whittingham's expectations in year one, but this is kind of the year where Michigan fans are gonna they're going to start to heat up a little bit if this year doesn't go well.
I mean, I definitely agree. I think that was the biggest thing of Underwood waiting and seeing and making his decision of what type of offense are they going to build around him? Like, are they going to put him in a spot to succeed? And I think Jason Beck has shown that at Utah. I think Kyle Whittingham continue to say like we are going to give you full support, and that was the first meeting he had and the longest meeting he probably had as well. Like the second he hit the ground in Orlando, it was what is Bryce Underwood up to, how can I meet his family, and like just get this down, because like you said, that's going to put everything else into place. Obviously you got to go out, you got to get better wide receivers. I think, some of the wide receivers on Michigan were suspect at times, but at times Bryce was to blame as well. But I think also getting a better offensive line around him, maybe adding a couple more pieces as well, wouldn't hurt. Wouldn't hurt, and having a healthy Justice Haynes would be massive for this team as well. And Jordan Marshall is, and I guess now Savion Hyder as well. But I think you can build some really good pieces. I'm interested to also see what that defense looks like for Michigan. Obviously, Michigan's been known for its defense for a long time. You've been there while it's, I guess, in its prime years as well. What is that going to look like in 2026? We'll see. It's going to be interesting, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say this about Kyle Whittingham too, and touch a little bit on the defense. The best part of bringing an active head coach to your school, although he did step down a few days before he was hired
Mhm.
by Michigan, is he has all the relationships. He at Utah, we've seen it with the coaching staff. He was able to convince a lot of them to come with him, and hopefully we see that in the transfer portal where he can kind of pick and choose which guys from Utah are going to come with him. And then speaking to the defense, something that Michigan has hung their hat on for years is their defensive line play. Utah's got a really good defensive line player. I believe the number one edge in the portal that if Michigan can land him, that's gonna be great for the program. And it all starts up front. Defensive line has to be the strength of that Michigan defense, and then everything else can kind of fall into place. So let's segue to Michigan State. Owen, I will take the chance to ask you some questions now about their new hire, Pat Fitzgerald, based on what you know about the situation, obviously being so close to the Michigan State football program. What are your initial thoughts? How do you view how they've attacked the transfer portal? How do you look at the staff they've hired? What do you think of him as a guy, being able to hear him speak and interact with those around him?
You know, Going from Jonathan Smith, first off, I just want to say he's a very nice guy. He always had the right intentions. He's a very smart schematical guy. That was always his big word, was schematics. But for Pat Fitzgerald to come in and at his press conference and when he spoke to the basketball, game or whatever like that, and he grabs the microphone and he's just getting everyone pumped up. Like that dude has a lot of testosterone. Like the level of change of like energy you could feel the second he entered the building. Like people were fired up. I think obviously it was tough to fire Jonathan Smith after 2 years. J Matt made his decision, but that's just the way Michigan State was going. When you hire a new president, the new president wants to bring in their athletic director. And then when you bring in a new athletic director, they want to bring in their new football coach because that's just what it is. When you keep an old guys, hire around and they're not succeeding, the blame's going to fall on you, whether that's fair or not. So Jay Bat, he's a business guy. He wants to sell things. That's his big thing is he's trying to sell a product to Michigan State fans and also donors as well. He couldn't really do that with Jonathan Smith and the way things were trending with Michigan State football. They decided to make the change. And Pat Fitzgerald, he's a very charismatic, outgoing dude that's trying to sell a vision. Obviously, the way things ended at Northwestern was unfortunate, but he went through the court process. He was cleared of everything. And talking to some of his former players and that sort of thing, everyone loves him. I think that wise of him having chemistry and as a leader and everything, I think he's an A plus. On the defensive side, he's obviously already he brought back Joe Rossi. So Joe Rossi, one of the few coaches that they retained. There's a couple other ones, including Courtney Hawkins, who was the wide receivers coach. Who he's had some good ones in the past. Keon Coleman, Jaden Reed, etc. But when you bring in a guy like Pat Fitzgerald, you're in a clean house. And that's basically what he did. He brought over a really good special teams coordinator. LeVar Woods is an up and coming dude that's been in Iowa for a second. He came over to Michigan State. He's now the assistant head coach or whatever the exact title is. He already brought in a top tier punter over from Iowa and everything. I think that's a home run hire. I think bringing back Joe Rossi was a good idea. Keep some continuity going with last year's team and this year's team as well. And then offensive side, they decide to just completely revamp things. I think the one thing I will say potentially I would be worried about if I was a Michigan State fan is Nick Sheridan. He was the co-OC at Alabama. He's been with DeBoer for a second and everything, but he's always had that co-OC title. I think it's going to be interesting to see how he does at Michigan State. Obviously, he's going to have to get used to Alessio Milivojevic, and they're going to bring in a whole bunch of new guys. The the new thing, if you follow Pat Fitzgerald on social media, they call it the Pat signal. Instead of the bat signal, it's the Pat signal. So every time he gets a recruit, he's posting and that sort of thing. And there's been a ton of guys. I think the count's still going up of dudes entering the transfer portal for Michigan State. I think it's north of 40 right now. But I think it's important that you bring in your guys, try to overturn the staff and everything, which they've done. The transfer portal window's not done, so they're still going to keep adding guys. But for year one, I don't have high expectations because it's tough. He's not bringing in guys like Kyle Whittingham did and everything. We just talked about that. But the most important thing that Jonathan Smith did not do in his first year was establish a culture. What are you going to be at Michigan State? Like, are you going to, in the fourth quarter, not crumble? Are you going to take teams like Michigan all the way to the very end, even if you lose? Like, are you going to really value the rivalry of Michigan State and that sort of game? Like, those are big things to watch out for. And obviously now the rivalry for Michigan State and Notre Dame is going to be renewed this season, which is going to be very interesting to watch for. In week 3, Michigan State goes to Notre Dame. I'm not saying that they're going to win or anything, but if you could go out there and give Notre Dame a battle, no matter where they're ranked and who they have, I mean, I think that's the first thing and the first step in the right direction. If they made a bowl game and went 6-6, I think Michigan State would be very happy because it's been since 2021 since MSU has made a bowl game. That was the Peach Bowl. I was a sophomore in college, so it's been a long time since that's happened. If you take a step in the right direction, nobody's expecting 7, 8 wins in year one. But I think if you can reach a bowl game and establish a culture, those are two things to check off, I guess, the boxes for year one for Pat Fitzgerald.
Yeah, those are all good points. And we talked a little bit when we were discussing Michigan about the pros of having a guy who's coming from a program being able to kind of take a lot of those players. You've seen Pat Fitzgerald assemble what I would call a decent staff right off the bat. And again,
Mhm.
Michigan State, at this stage of where the football program is, they're going to have to probably take a few flyers on guys. Like you mentioned, the Alabama co-OC. Maybe you're trying to find a little bit of a diamond in the rough. And Michigan State has historically been that type of program. Under the D'Antonio years, when Michigan State was at its peak, they would take guys who they weren't the biggest athletes, they weren't the fastest athletes, they weren't some of these big time recruits that go to some of the blue blood schools, but they would develop these guys into NFL products, and they would be able to give any team a run for their money. There was hard nosed Big Ten
Mhm.
football. And I'll ask you the question with Pat Fitzgerald. Obviously, he knows the rivalry. He's been around the Big Ten. Do you foresee any issues with not being able to have guys ready in the transfer portal? Or would you say that Jay Batt and the athletic department has done a good job being able to give him the resources to go and get guys that will make this team at least bowl eligible, if not better, in year one? Does
Yeah,
that
I mean,
concern you?
no, I think they have the resources, and I think that's the biggest thing is trying to get people on board in year one. That's always the big thing. Is like right now we're wondering what is Pat Fitzgerald going to do in year one? What is Kyle Whittingham going to do? Like we don't know. It's been a minute since Pat Fitzgerald has been a head coach. Obviously at a Big Ten program and everything like that. Talking about the rivalry, I don't even know if you know this, but Nick Sheridan, he's a former Wolverines quarterback. He was a walk on at Michigan, also Saline native. I think having those sort of things of not having a coaching staff all from the West Coast and everything that really knows what this rivalry means. And I don't want to take shots at the old coaching staff, but that's just kind of what it was. They had no idea. Like after the first time Michigan State played under Jonathan Smith in 2024, Smith took the podium and he said, "I had no idea what this rivalry really was." Like he's like, I learned a lot. He had no idea, and that's okay. I mean, if you're all over there, you're probably not paying attention to that sort of thing. So I think that's important. I think Pat Fitzgerald really realizes that. He's played in the Big Ten. He knows what the big rivalries are. And you got guys like Nick Sheridan and returning guys like Joe Rossi and Courtney Hawkins, who have been a part of the rivalry as well, of how much that really means. I'm not saying Michigan State's going to win or anything like that this upcoming year. Who knows? That's a long ways away. But to have those sort of things is vital to really energize, and especially with having so much transfer portal turnover, educate the guys as well. Like, what does this mean? And bringing in alums and that sort of thing. Like, what does Michigan State really mean to Michigan State? Because it's been a minute. They have not won since 2021. And it seems like every single year, MSU really doesn't stand a chance. Like MSU fans, they had this thing this year was the I believe and everything like that. And you know, I guess they held in for the first half, but in the second half, it just wasn't much of a game. If you can make it a game all four quarters, all the way to the very end, I think that's a win in itself, especially in year one for Pat Fitzgerald. But to your point of the resources and everything like that, I think it's here at Michigan State. And I think Jay Bad's starting to tap in, which is a good thing. I don't think MSU is going to get these superstar, five-star, top of the portal guys in year one with Pat Fitzgerald. But that's why it's so important to show like this is the product we're building, and here's after year one something we can point to, or maybe one game. And maybe they could upset somebody, or a few games where like we battled all the way to the end. But if we add you from the transfer portal, you're going to make the difference in that sort of thing. So I think those are all interesting things to look out for.
And I would say, as a Michigan fan too, this is the first time where you can sense a little bit of buzz in the Michigan State football program or the entire athletic department as a whole. Jay Batt comes in, he gets the $400 million donation to the school. I mean, those are really big things that can make huge tangible difference. And when you show a little bit of success and you actually have a product on the field that people can start to believe in, that's when even more donor money comes in. And I think there's just been so much hopelessness in the Michigan State football program these past few years that there's no reason for some of these donors to throw money at the problem because it wasn't going to be fixing anything. And I
Right.
think already in this past year with Jay Batt, Pat Fitzgerald, you can kind of see that culture start to change. And I think it's only going to be positive for Michigan State, at least more positive than it was
Mhm.
under the previous athletic director, Jonathan Smith.
Yeah, and another thing they're trying to sell right now is the naming rights of Spartan Stadium. They already have a plan laid out and everything where they're going to renovate parts of Spartan Stadium, and it certainly needs it. The stadium is very much needs some renovations, and already this past season they've been really trying to work on the concessions and the fan experience, that sort of thing. They added fireworks to Spartan Stadium. You know, they shot those off after touchdowns, but you didn't see those much after
Well,
the first part of the season. But yeah.
hopefully they don't have to message people and offer free tickets to try and get to the last game of the year. Hopefully it's a little
Yeah.
bit more competitive for that. And again, as a Michigan fan, football is great when that rivalry between Michigan and Michigan State is,
Hmm.
competitive. It's high level. I miss those days. I love beating up on little brother, but
I think,
some of those games where it's so close, you got
yeah.
everything riding, all your friends, all the crap you're gonna get if your team loses. That just makes it so fun. And I go back to the 2021 day, which was one of the worst days of my life. I remember waking up that morning with the buzz in the air, and that was just such a fun day until Michigan collapsed there at the end. But
You know,
we'll see.
this is not going to happen, but it would be cool to see college game day in Ann Arbor for,
Yeah.
can you imagine Pat Fitzgerald and all the testosterone and energy he's got? And you got Kyle Whittingham. He's riding around as Harley Davidson. He's got the dude's insane. He's a big workout freak, as is Pat Fitzgerald. Like you get the combination of those two dudes, like It could be fireworks. I'm excited.
Yeah.
So
Could we get the head coach fight in the tunnel this upcoming year?
that
Who would you take
that's
your bet on between the two coaches?
dude, a 66-year-old Kyle Whittingham and a much younger Pat Fitzgerald. I'm not sure what his exact age is, but Fitzgerald has been off, so he's had some time to get his body in a good shape and everything. I would lean Pat Fitzgerald. I don't know about you, but I mean, I've seen, well,
Yeah.
like we've seen on Pat McAfee's show that supposedly Whittingham has beaten Pat McAfee in an arm wrestle, even though I think that thing was rigged. But yeah, I'm just saying, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, either way, I think it's two great hires for the two in-state programs, and I think the future is definitely bright, and both programs have upgraded from their previous head coaches, and hopefully that's a sign of good days to come for both programs.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to end on. We've been talking for a minute. We're not exactly sure when we're going to do the next episode, but the goal is to really start pumping these out. So if you can, I guess, subscribe, follow us, keep things going. We're gonna work on possibly changing a new name. We still haven't discussed that sort of thing, but we're going to tinker some things. But this is the goal of 2026 is to really start pumping out some content. Obviously, Nick is with Octagon. He's working with agents. He knows athletes, that sort of thing. Like what is his side of the ball and my side of being around Michigan State athletics, being on the field, being on the sidelines of these games, like being in those atmospheres. What is that like? Interviewing the coaches, that sort of thing, like behind the scenes sort of thing. So I think now, obviously, with us being out of college, of different sort of things and angles of looking at Michigan, Michigan State, the Lions, Red Wings, like that sort of thing, being in our experiences, like that's just what we're trying to offer to you guys as a viewership and everything like that. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, and I think I'll just say that it's fun to be doing this again with you, Owen. It's been a long time coming. We've been talking about this for a while, and the revival is going to be a lot of fun. To the audience, we welcome hopefully a lot of interaction with you guys, whether that's helping with a new name change, maybe giving us some topics that you guys want to hear about. Historically, we've kind of kept it to the Michigan sports teams in college and NFL, NBA, MLB, you name it with the four professional sports leagues. So we're happy to expand. We have a
Well,
lot
you're a
more
Chargers
experience.
guy. You're a big Chargers guy. That's
Uh,
the rumor.
I still know a lot of people on the Chargers. I root for them when it's not conflicting with the Lions, but we've both been able to have some amazing experiences within sports since we started this podcast in 2018, 2019 in high school. And we'd love to talk about that with you guys as an audience. And we look forward to being able to share more content, share more experiences in what looks like an exciting 2026.
All right. With that being said, we'll see you next time. Peace.
Bye, guys.